I don't usually share this kind of thing with many people, but those who enjoy hearing stories like this understand how some experiences just keep haunting your thoughts. If you're into this too, make sure to subscribe. It really helps me keep sharing stories like this here. It started, as most modern horrors do, online. I stumbled upon a social media profile named The Curator. There was no bio, no one it followed, no interaction, just a gallery of images that felt like forgotten memories. Each photo had a soft, almost ethereal quality, depicting mundane places stripped of all human presence. A lone swing on a foggy morning, an empty booth in a roadside diner, a bridge shrouded in mist. The aesthetic was hauntingly beautiful, but there was an undercurrent of profound loneliness to it. A silence so deep, it felt like a scream that had been held back for years. At first, I wrote it off as a morbid art project, a clever commentary on urban decay or the fleeting nature of safety. My job as a tech journalist means I see dozens of strange online phenomena every week, most of them fleeting and meaningless. But a pattern began to emerge, one that was too precise to be a coincidence. I noticed that a few hours after The Curator would post a new image, a news alert would flash on my screen, reporting a freak accident at the exact location depicted. A photo of a quiet intersection would be followed by a report of a multi-car pileup. An image of a serene park bench would precede a story about a fatal gas line explosion nearby. The timestamps were irrefutable. The photos were always uploaded just before the tragedy struck, turning the account from an art project into a digital harbinger of death. The one that solidified the horror for me was a photo of a small, local playground. It focused on a single red swing, its chains rusted, hanging slightly askew. The lighting was that of a late, hazy afternoon, beautiful and melancholic. 6 hours later, the local news channel ran a heartbreaking story. The main support beam of that very swing set had rotted through and collapsed, killing a young girl who was playing on it. That's when it stopped being a curiosity. The abstract data points on my screen, timestamps, geotags, news headlines, coalesced into a single, sickening reality. This wasn't a prediction. It felt like an announcement. A cold, metallic dread settled in my gut. The kind you feel when you realize you've stumbled upon something you were never meant to see. A mechanism of tragedy that was supposed to remain hidden from view. My name is Leo, and for the last 10 years, I've lived my life primarily through screens. My apartment is less a home and more a command center, perpetually bathed in the cold blue glow of 3 monitors. Wires snake across the floor like metallic vines, and the air always carries the faint, acrid scent of hot electronics and day-old coffee. As a journalist who specializes in dismantling digital hoaxes and exposing online predators, cynicism has become my armor. I've seen the worst of human behavior manifest in pixels and code, and I've trained myself to believe there's always a rational, if often pathetic, explanation for everything. The internet's darkest corners were my professional backyard. I thought I was immune to its ghosts, desensitized to its attempts to shock and horrify. I was catastrophically wrong about that. This professional detachment has bled into my personal life. I tend to keep people at a distance, finding it far easier to analyze systems than to navigate the messy unpredictability of human relationships. A significant loss years ago taught me that the real world was just as arbitrary and cruel as the digital one. So I retreated into the clean logic of my work, where every effect had a traceable cause. My apartment, situated on the 22nd floor, feels like a watchtower overlooking a city I'm no longer truly a part of. The endless, dreary rain of that particular autumn streaked the windows, blurring the lights of the skyscrapers into abstract watercolor smudges. The sound of the city was a distant, muffled roar, a constant reminder of the world happening down below, a world that felt increasingly unreal. My routine, once a predictable cycle of deadlines and research, was completely hijacked by this digital phantom. Every night, I'd find myself sitting in the oppressive dark, my face illuminated only by the growing gallery of the curator's photos. I meticulously saved every image, created complex spreadsheets to track the time between the post and the reported incident, and ran forensic analyses on the metadata, desperately searching for a digital breadcrumb, any clue to the source. The normal sounds of my apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the groan of the building settling, started to feel like intrusions. The only sound that mattered was the soft notification chime for a new post, a sound that began to trigger a Pavlovian response of pure, unadulterated dread. My sanctuary had become a hunting ground. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. The familiar chime of a new post cut through the silence of my apartment, and I felt a jolt of adrenaline, my body already conditioned for the dread that would follow. The image that loaded onto my screen was of a pedestrian overpass, one of those ugly concrete arteries that cross over the city's main highway. The concrete was stained with years of rain and pollution, and a single, flickering street lamp at the far end cast a sickly, jaundiced glow onto the empty walkway. A wave of nausea washed over me, a feeling colder and sharper than before. I knew that bridge. I drove under it twice a day on my commute, back when I actually had a commute. It was less than 3 miles from my building. The curator was no longer a distant phenomenon. It was here. A frantic, chaotic debate erupted in my mind. My journalistic instincts screamed at me to maintain distance, to document, not to interfere. But the human part of me, the part I had suppressed for so long, felt a crushing weight of responsibility. I couldn't just sit here and wait for the news alert this time. I couldn't just add another entry to my morbid spreadsheet. What could I do, though? Call the police? I played the conversation out in my head, the disbelief, the suspicion. I follow a ghost on the internet who posts pictures of places right before someone dies there. They'd think I was a prankster, or worse, the one making a threat. The helplessness was suffocating, but inaction felt like complicity. I grabbed my keys and coat, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had to go. The air on the overpass was cold and bit at my exposed skin, the roar of the traffic below a constant, deafening rumble. I felt exposed, vulnerable, my eyes darting around frantically. I walked its length a dozen times, my phone's flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, scanning for a loose railing, a structural crack, anything. The few late-night travelers who crossed gave me a wide berth, unnerved by the wild-eyed man staring intently at the concrete. After 2 hours of finding nothing, I left, feeling like a paranoid fool. The next morning, I saw the news report. It wasn't a collapse. It wasn't a crime. A 54-year-old man had suffered a massive, fatal coronary event while jogging across it at dawn. The curator wasn't just predicting accidents, it was predicting death itself, in all its forms. Realizing I couldn't act alone, I fell back on my profession. I wrote an article, the most difficult piece of my career. It was meticulously researched, carefully worded, filled with anonymized data, screenshots, and timelines. A journalistic examination of the curator. I avoided sensationalism, presenting it as a chilling case study of a new, terrifying form of cyber phenomenon. I published it on a personal blog, bypassing my editor. The reaction was swift and brutal. The comments section was a cesspool of ridicule, branding me a fearmonger and a hack. Worse, my editor called, his voice tight with a mix of anger and disappointment, formally warning me against publishing unsubstantiated conspiracy theories that could damage our publication's credibility. I had staked my professional reputation on the truth, and the world had responded by calling me a liar. I was completely alone with this thing. The next day, the curator posted again. It was a direct response, an escalation. The photo was of the lobby of my own apartment building. I recognized it instantly. The worn floral pattern on the 2 armchairs by the entrance, the slight scuff mark on the wall near the mailboxes, the cheap, generic art hanging crookedly, and the emptiness. The same haunting, vacant stillness. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. This was a message delivered with cold, digital precision. I see you. I know where you are. The paranoia that had been a low hum in the back of my mind cranked up to a piercing shriek. Every footstep in the hallway outside my door, every groan of the elevator, became a potential threat. My home, my last remaining sanctuary, now felt like a glass cage. The article had another unintended consequence. 2 days later, my apartment buzzer rang. It was a pair of detectives, a man and a woman with tired eyes and deeply skeptical faces. Someone had sent them my article. They weren't there to hear my story about a ghost in the machine. They were there to talk to me. They asked about the bridge, about my unusual interest in recent fatal accidents. They saw a pattern, but I was the one at the center of it. In their world of tangible evidence, the obsessive journalist who always seemed to know where tragedy would strike was a much more plausible suspect than a prophetic social media account. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has ever been through something like this. That's why I keep sharing these stories here. If you enjoy these strange accounts too, subscribe. It gives me strength to keep bringing more. I started watching the lobby through my peephole, a prisoner in my own apartment. My heart was in my throat for hours. Then, late in the afternoon, I saw my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, walking toward the elevator. A primal, instinctual alarm went off in my head. I threw my door open and yelled for her to wait, my voice raw with panic. She turned, startled, just as the elevator doors slid open with a sickening groan. There was a bright blue flash from inside, a shower of sparks, and the sound of a massive cable snapping and whipping against the shaft walls. I had saved her life, but in the aftermath, all she could tell the building security, and later the detectives, was that the strange, paranoid journalist from apartment 22B had started screaming just seconds before the elevator failed. I hadn't prevented a tragedy. I had simply become its star witness. I was trapped. The police saw me as a suspect. My career was in ashes, and my home had become a fishbowl. I was on the verge of breaking when the chime sounded again. I almost didn't look, but the compulsion was too strong. The image that filled my screen wasn't a public place. It was a bedroom bathed in the soft light of a setting sun. Dust motes danced in the air, and on the ceiling there was a hairline crack shaped like a lightning bolt. I felt the air leave my lungs in a single, ragged gasp. I knew that crack. I had stared at it for hours as a child, imagining it as a river or a dragon's tail. This wasn't just a picture of a room, it was a picture of my room, in the house I grew up in, a house that was sold 20 years ago. The intimate nature of the photograph, the sheer impossibility of it, broke through my paralysis. The aesthetic, that dreamlike vintage quality, it had always bothered me, and now I knew why. I scrambled through my apartment, a man possessed, pulling dusty, forgotten boxes from the back of my closet. I was looking for something I hadn't seen since my mother's funeral, her old photo albums and art supplies. She had been a passionate amateur photographer, her camera a permanent fixture of my childhood. She loved capturing quiet, empty spaces, finding the beauty in what other people overlooked. A cold, terrible suspicion began to crystallize in my mind as I tore open a box marked M. Evans Prints. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. My fingers brushed against a stack of thick, glossy photo paper. I pulled out the first print. It was the playground. The single red swing, the rusted chains, the melancholic late afternoon light. It wasn't a similar photo. It was the exact photo from the curator's feed, down to the precise framing and depth of field. It was an original physical print. The paper yellowed slightly with age. My breath hitched. I dug deeper into the box, my frantic search scattering photos across my floor. The abandoned diner booth, its vinyl cracked. The fog-covered bridge, its girders disappearing into the white. The desolate pedestrian overpass under that sickly yellow light. They were all there. A gallery of my childhood, a portfolio of future tragedies. This was her work, all of it. These weren't new photographs taken by some omnipresent specter. They were old prints, captured decades ago by my mother. The realization didn't bring relief, only a deeper, more profound horror. The locations weren't random, they were places she had taken me. The park where I learned to ride a bike, the diner we stopped at on road trips, the bridge we crossed to visit my grandparents. These were our places, our memories. Someone had found her art, her private vision of the world, and was systematically desecrating it. They were turning her love into a weapon, her eye for beauty into a harbinger of death. The cold, impersonal threat had become intimately, excruciatingly personal. But how? How could anyone have them? My mind, trained to find digital pathways, started racing. Years ago, not long before the hit and run that took her life, I had convinced her to digitize her best work. I spent a weekend scanning her favorite negatives and prints, uploading the high-resolution files to a private cloud storage account linked to her personal email. It was meant to preserve her legacy, to keep her art safe forever. The account had been dormant for years, a digital mausoleum. The password was a combination of her favorite poet and her birth year, something I believed only the two of us could have ever known. A password I hadn't thought about since the day she died. With trembling hands that I could barely control, I navigated to her old email provider. I still had the credentials saved in my password manager, a digital artifact of a life that no longer existed. My heart pounded as I typed in the familiar characters and hit enter. Access granted. I clicked on the account security tab, my eyes scanning the recent activity log. My blood turned to ice. There it was, logged in plain text. One successful login from an unrecognized IP address 3 months ago, just before the first post from the curator appeared. Then I checked her linked applications and found it. An old, forgotten portfolio profile she had created, its name now changed. Its name was The Curator. The truth crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. Someone had gained access to her digital remains. They had seized control of her dormant account, her life's work, her memory. This whole time, I had been chasing a ghost, a supernatural entity, a digital angel of death. I believed I was dealing with something inexplicable, something beyond human comprehension. The reality was so much worse. This wasn't supernatural. It was meticulously, cruelly human. Someone was puppeteering my mother's ghost, turning her into a monster to psychologically torture me. The calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. They weren't just killing strangers. They were murdering my memory of her. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place, and the picture it formed was one of pure, undiluted malice. This wasn't about the victims. They were just props in a twisted play designed for an audience of one. Me. The locations, the photos, the timing, it was all designed to drag me in, to make me obsessed, to isolate me, and then to break me with this final, devastating revelation. The question of what the curator was had been answered, but it was replaced by a far more terrifying question, one that echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of my apartment. Who? Who hated me this much? Who from my past would be capable of such a monstrous, patient, and intimately cruel act of revenge? I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of my mother's art, when the final chime sounded. I flinched, a raw nerve exposed. My hand shook as I reached for the phone. The picture was mundane, almost boring. It was a simple, sun-drenched photo of a quiet suburban street corner, a stop sign slightly bent, a fire hydrant on the curb. But I knew it better than I knew my own reflection. It was the corner of Elm and 4th Street, the exact spot where, 23 years ago, a hit-and-run driver had taken my mother's life. This was the end game, a performance of cruelty staged at the nexus of all my pain. The clock was ticking again, but this time the location was my own personal ground zero. The choice was clear: walk knowingly into my tormentor's trap, or stay home and let it happen. In the end, I did nothing. In a final, desperate act of defiance, I refused to play my part. I unplugged my router, powered down my monitors, and dropped my phone into a drawer. I sat in the silent, suffocating darkness of my apartment, and let the deadline pass. Every siren in the distance sending a fresh wave of sickness through me. The next day, there was no major headline, no news of a horrific fatal accident. I obsessively checked the local police blotter online and found only a single minor report from that evening. A 2-car fender bender at that intersection. No injuries, just a broken taillight and frayed nerves. The sheer anticlimax of it was the most chilling thing of all. The game wasn't about killing, it was about making me watch. I moved out of the city a month later. I have a different job now, one that doesn't involve staring into the digital abyss. The curator account went silent after that last post and was deleted a week later, as mysteriously as it appeared. Its work was done. I never found out who was behind it. A spurned colleague? A forgotten enemy from my university days? I still don't know. They are out there, a phantom from my past, and they know they broke me. My mother's photos are still in a box, a part of my history that is now forever poisoned. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened, but as long as these memories keep haunting me, I'll keep sharing them here. If you want to hear more, subscribe. It really helps keep this space alive.